The wind came in low from the west, stirring the tall, gold-burned grass that stretched like an endless, rippling sea across Cedar Hollow. The land was wide out here, open and empty, save for the distant calls of coyotes threading through the approaching dusk. Clouds hung heavy in the sky, the kind that promised rain before night's end. The scent of it carried on the wind, wet earth and brittle leaves, the season's last breath before winter set its hand on the land. Elias Cade sat on his porch, one boot propped against the railing, a battered lantern resting at his side. He watched the horizon the way a man watches a fire he doesn't intend to feed. Steady, silent, without expectation. The glow of the coming dusk softened the sharp lines of his weathered face. The sun-creased edges of his eyes, carrying the weight of years, marked more by loss than laughter. The house behind him was little more than a squat rectangle of wood, its porch sagging and roof patched with whatever scrap he'd had on hand. The fields beyond stretched empty now, save for a few stubborn cows huddled beneath a wind-stunted tree near the fence line. The old world felt far away here. That was how Elias preferred it. When the first drops of rain came, they struck the porch roof with a soft, hollow sound. Elias didn't move. Rain had always meant little to him, something that came, something that passed. He leaned forward, striking a match against the sole of his boot and coaxing the lantern to life. Its warm, flickering glow spilled against the wood planks, a fragile bit of light in the gathering dark. He didn't notice the figure on the road until she was nearly at the gate. At first, she was just a shape in the storm, her cloak dark and clinging to her as the rain quickened. The sky behind her bruised to a deep, swollen purple, streaks of light fading fast as night settled over the hollow. She moved with the steadiness of someone long accustomed to traveling alone, her steps unhurried despite the weather. Elias rose, the boards creaking under his weight. He felt no surge of alarm, only a quiet curiosity. Few people came this way, and those who did rarely lingered. He stepped down from the porch as the stranger reached the steps, water dripping from the brim of her hood. She stopped, lifting her face just enough for him to see the pale oval of it, the sharp clarity of green eyes beneath the dark, rain-matted hair. "Evening," she said, her voice carrying the rasp of a long day and more miles than most cared to reckon with. "Didn't mean to trouble you. Just passing through. Wondered if I might have a dry corner for the night." There was no tremble in it, no pleading, just simple, human need. Elias hesitated, the way a man who's lived too long alone tends to when faced with the unexpected. Then he gave a single, slow nod and pushed open the door behind him. "Come in." She crossed the porch and stepped inside, the lantern's light catching on the wet edges of her cloak, turning drops of rain to glints of gold. He set the lantern down on a nearby table, the glow brightening the small room, with walls, a narrow bed, a cold stove, and a single chair drawn close to the hearth where embers still smoldered from the afternoon. Without being told, she moved to the fire, kneeling to warm her hands. He watched her a moment, noting the way her fingers trembled slightly from the cold. She carried a small leather satchel, worn and patched, the kind healers and wanderers favored. "I'll get you a blanket," Elias said quietly. He disappeared into the back room and returned with a rough wool throw, offering it without ceremony. She took it with a grateful nod, wrapping it around her shoulders as she settled into the chair. Neither spoke. The rain beat against the windows now, a steady, soothing rhythm. Elias poured 2 cups of coffee from the dented tin pot that sat on the stove's edge. It was weak and bitter, but warm. He handed one to her, then lowered himself onto a bench opposite the hearth. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It wasn't the kind that demanded filling. It felt companionable, natural. 2 people aware of their own solitude, sharing a moment neither had planned for. Outside, the wind tugged at the eaves. The coyotes called again, farther off now. The room glowed with the soft light of the lantern and the dim orange coals on the hearth. It was a kind of peace Elias hadn't known in a long while. She spoke first. "Marin Dove," she said simply, her gaze still on the fire. He nodded. "Elias Cade." They left it at that. Small details wove their way into the evening. The way she set her cup down with a careful hand, how he refilled the lantern oil without needing to be asked. She offered no stories, and he didn't ask for any. The storm moved over the land, the hollow cradled in rain. Later, as the hours stretched toward night, Elias took the lantern and set it closer to her chair. Its glow softened the sharp planes of her face, revealed the curve of a mouth rarely given to easy smiles. She looked up then, eyes meeting his, and in that unguarded glance, something passed between them. Not lightning, not the frantic spark of sudden want. It was something older, quieter. The simple recognition of another soul shaped by loneliness and long roads, by loss and survival. Elias spoke, the words unplanned. So this is what love looks like. He didn't say it to her, not really. More to himself, like a man noting the shape of a thing he'd half forgotten, but never fully lost. She held his gaze a moment, then offered a small, tired smile. Outside, the rain softened to a mist. The lantern flickered, and the night closed gently around them. Morning broke slow and gentle over Cedar Hollow, the world washed clean by the night's rain. The field stretched out in every direction, glistening with beads of water that clung to every blade of grass and leaf, catching the early light like scattered pieces of glass. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and a low mist hung along the edges of the creek bed, curling up around the rocks and fence posts. Elias was already outside when Maren stepped onto the porch, the heavy wool blanket from the night still folded over one arm. He was working at the fence line, a hammer hanging loosely from his hand, inspecting the spots where the storm had bowed the wire and shaken loose a few boards. His movements were unhurried, as they always were, but certain, the kind of labor born from a life of necessity rather than choice. Maren hesitated a moment before calling out. "I should be moving on," she said, her voice carrying easily in the crisp morning air. Elias looked up, squinting against the pale sunlight. He studied her in that quiet, unreadable way he had, then shifted his gaze back to the fence post. "Fence line needs mending," he said. "Could use an extra pair of hands." She knew he didn't ask for things easily. The invitation was plain, set there between them like a stone in the road. Maren glanced at the empty fields, the long, rutted path that stretched out beyond the hollow. The thought of miles of nothing, of more nights alone in rain-soaked barns and roadside camps, held little appeal just then. She set the blanket down on the porch rail. "I can stay a day or two." They worked in easy, steady company. There was no talk of debts or thanks, no questions about plans. Elias showed her how to reset the wire along the fence, how to wedge a stone just right beneath the posts so the earth wouldn't swallow them with the next hard rain. Maren's hands were sure and practiced, and she took to the work without complaint. The sky stayed high and bright above them, the wind tugging at the long grass in restless sighs. When the wagon axle gave out near the barn, a deep crack splitting the old wood clean through, it was Maren who knelt beside it, fingers running along the brake. Elias fetched a length of timber from the lean-to, and together they wrestled the axle free, Elias holding the weight while she fitted the new piece into place. The work was slow, the sun dipping lower with each pass of the tools, but neither rushed. There was a kind of satisfaction in it, the simple pleasure of shared labor and steady hands. At midday, a thin colt staggered in from the far pasture, its coat slick with sweat, eyes glassy and unfocused. Elias cursed under his breath and moved to intercept it, his hands firm but careful as he eased the trembling animal into the shelter of the barn. Maren followed without being asked, kneeling beside the horse as Elias wiped its neck down with cool water. "Fever," she murmured, feeling along its throat, her brow furrowed. She dug into the satchel she carried, pulling out a slender vial of willow bark tincture and a cloth. Together, they tended the colt, working in silence. Elias handed her whatever she needed without question, and Maren murmured soft words meant more for the animal than for him. By nightfall, the colt was resting easier, its breathing slow to a steady rise and fall. Inside the house, the stove fire crackled low as Maren mixed flour and water, her hands dusted with white, while Elias cut kindling and watched the evening settle through the window. The bread baked slowly in the cast-iron pan, filling the small room with the comforting scent of warmth and grain. They ate it plain, No but despair, seated across from each other at the scarred table. The quiet stretched between them, but it was a good, easy quiet. Later, by the fire, Maren sat on the floor, her legs tucked beneath her as she braided her hair in the dim light. Elias watched her from his place by the hearth, noting the simple grace in the motion of her hands, the way the flicker of the flames turned her hair to copper and bronze. She didn't seem to mind his gaze, didn't hurry her work or shy away. When she was done, she folded the worn blanket from the porch over his shoulders, without a word, the gesture small and unassuming. Elias let it happen, feeling the unexpected weight of it settle over him. They sat outside afterward, the wind moving in soft gusts through the hollow, carrying with it the distant calls of coyotes. The sky stretched out overhead, vast and clean, a wash of stars breaking through the last shreds of cloud. Neither spoke of hearts or hopes. There was only talk of weather, the chance of early frost, whether the fence line would hold through winter. Piece by piece, bits of their past slipped free in those passing moments. Maren spoke once of a brother, long buried, fever having taken him the way it did so many in those lean years. She told it not as a tragedy, but as a fact of life, like drought or bad harvests. Elias spoke in kind, mentioning the graves on the ridge beyond the creek, his wife, his boy. No names given, no story spun. Loss was the currency of the frontier, and both understood it too well to make a spectacle of it. The days settled into a rhythm. The cold grew stronger. The fence held. The bread rose better the second time. Then one evening, a rider from town passed through, a neighbor named Owen bringing a note from Jasper, a rancher's boy with a sick daughter down in Timber Run. Word had traveled that a healer woman was nearby, and he was asking after her. Elias held the note out to her, without comment. Maren read it twice. The road back to Timber Run would mean days of hard riding, maybe more if the river had swelled. She folded the paper carefully, tucking it into her satchel. "I'll leave at dawn," she said. Elias only nodded. That evening, they sat outside again. The lantern glowed between them, its light pooling over the worn boards. The coyotes called, the sound lonesome and sweet. Maren broke the silence, her voice low. "Will you light the lantern after I'm gone?" Elias looked out over the fields, the night softening the world to gentle shadows. "I reckon I might." No promises. No need for them. The world had made both cautious of such things. And so they sat, side by side, two people bound not by words, but by 100 quiet moments, the kind of closeness that settled into the bones, steady as the earth itself. The stars wheeled overhead. The lantern burned, and somewhere beyond the ridge, the coyotes sang the night toward morning. The morning came slow and gray, the kind of dawn where the sun stayed hidden behind a wall of low, heavy clouds. A thin mist clung to the ground, curling around the fence posts and seeping into the folds of old coats and saddlebags. The scent of damp earth hung in the air, the world still quiet save for the soft clatter of a single saddle being cinched tight. Maren moved with steady hands, securing her satchel against the side of her mare. Her dark hair, braided neat, disappeared beneath the hood of her cloak. She checked the straps once, then again, more from habit than need. Every motion carried a certain finality, a quiet readiness for the road ahead. Across the yard, Elias Cade sat on a low stool near the fence, a whetstone in one hand, a fence tool in the other. He drew the blade across the stone with slow, deliberate strokes, the metallic rasp cutting through the mystic air. His eyes stayed on the task, though every part of him knew exactly what was happening behind him. Neither spoke. Maren slipped the final strap into place, then stood for a long moment with her hand resting on the saddle horn. The mare shifted beneath her, flicking her ears at the distant sounds that filtered through the hollow, the chirr of crickets, the mournful lowing of a cow somewhere beyond the rise. It felt like 100 other mornings, and yet not like any of them. Elias set down the tool, wiped the blade clean on a scrap of cloth. The stone dropped into his palm again, his thumb rubbing along its edge. He didn't look up. She crossed the yard toward him. "I'll be off now," she said, voice soft as the mist. He gave a single nod, neither cold nor eager, just the way men like Elias Cade acknowledged things they couldn't hold on to. Then the sound came, the steady, measured hoofbeats of a lone rider cresting the hill beyond the fence line. Both turned toward it at the same time. The figure was broad-shouldered, dust-caked from the road, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. The coat he wore hung heavy with travel, his horse a lean, narrow-chested gelding streaked with sweat and road dust. The rifle slung across the saddle horn told its own story. Elias rose, his stance easy but watchful. The rider reined in at the edge of the yard, boots hanging loose in the stirrups. He lifted a hand in half a greeting, his gaze moving from Elias to Marin and back again. "Morning," he called. The voice was low, carrying the rasp of dust roads and smoke-thick saloons. "Name's Levi Kane." Elias said nothing, but his hand brushed the fence tool, more out of instinct than intent. Levi Kane's reputation was known in these parts. Not a killer for hire, but a man who kept to the fringes of law, fetching what others were too soft-hearted or slow-handed to collect. A bounty man, a promise-keeper. The kind of name spoken low when debts came due. Kane tipped his head toward Marin. "I'm looking for a woman by the name of Marin Dove," he said, though from the way his eyes held hers, he already knew. Marin took a step forward, her chin lifting a fraction. "I'm here." Kane nodded. "Got word you owed a promise to a family down in Dry Fork. 3 winters back. Woman's boy was dying. You said you'd bring him a cure." Her shoulders squared. "I did." Kane shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking. "Word is you vanished not long after. Left folks thinking you'd run, or met worse. I'm here to see you make good on it." The hollow filled with a stillness, so deep it felt like even the earth had paused to listen. No one reached for a gun. There was no bark challenge, no heavy footfalls toward a fight. Just the 3 of them and the mist curling around their boots. Elias stepped forward then, moving to stand between them, not aggressive, but steady. His voice came quiet, carrying just enough weight to be heard. "She's headed to town. To do just that." Kane considered him a long moment. A lesser man might have seen the weathered face and the farmer's clothes and thought little of it. But Kane knew the look of men who didn't bluff. He sat back slightly in the saddle, his gaze sliding once more to Marin. "That right?" Marin nodded. "I lost my brother that same winter," she said. "Grief will do strange things to a person, but I intend to finish what I should have then." Kane studied her a beat longer. Whatever he saw there must have settled something in him, because after a moment he huffed out a breath and tipped his hat back. "Well," he said, "world's got enough orphans in it without me making one more. You'll see it done." "I will." Kane nodded, wheeled his gelding around with a sharp tug of the reins. "Good enough." He tipped his hat once more toward Elias. "You take care of yours, Cade." Without waiting for a reply, he rode out the way he came, his silhouette swallowed by mist and distance within minutes. For a long while, neither Marin nor Elias moved. The world seemed to settle around them again, the weight of the moment sinking quiet into the soil. Marin turned then, her gaze finding Elias. There was a softness there now, something unspoken but heavy in its meaning. "I was leaving before dawn came," she said. "I figured." She took a step closer. "Guess now I have to." "I'll light the lantern," Elias said, his voice so even it might have been a simple remark about the weather, but the meaning ran deeper than that. She smiled, a tired, tender thing, and reached out. Her hand pressed against his chest, palm flat over the place, where his heart beat slow and steady. She left it there for a breath, then 2. Not a kiss, not a promise. Just a lingering touch meant to be remembered. "I'll look for it," she whispered. Then she turned, mounted her mare, and rode out beneath a pale, rising sun that struggled to burn through the mist. The world closed behind her like the hush of a hand over a flame, leaving only the echo of hoofbeats and the steady glow of a waiting lantern. The days settled into their old, familiar shape after she left. Elias Cade rose with the sun, worked the fields, mended the fence, and took his meals in the same chair by the fire. The house, already quiet, seemed quieter still. Even the wind moving through the hollow sounded different, like a voice speaking to no one. Autumn wore on, the gold of the grasslands dimming to brittle straw, and then to a dull, sleep-heavy gray as the first hints of winter crept along the edges of the land. The nights came earlier. The coyotes still called, but their voices sounded farther off now, thin and lonesome against the cold sky. The lantern stayed where it always had, by the door. Elias didn't light it, not because he wouldn't, but because he hadn't yet been asked. It waited there, its glass chimney clean, its wick trimmed and ready, a quiet promise in a world that rarely made them. The fence kept needing mending. The storms that rolled in from the west snapped posts and bowed wire, and Elias worked it as he always had, with slow, steady hands. The sick colt pulled through, growing stronger, though it still limped in the left hind leg. Life kept on, in its plain, unremarkable way. It wasn't until the third week that a letter came. Owen, the neighbor boy, brought it from town, a single slip of paper folded careful as a prayer, the name written in a hand Elias recognized without needing to open it. He took it with a nod, offering no word of thanks, though Owen seemed to understand the kind of men who kept their words locked behind their teeth. Inside, by the fire, Elias opened it. Elias. Made Clay bend by the second week. The family's girl pulled through. Fever broke last night. The mother wept hard enough to bring the walls down. A good sound to hear. Thought you'd want to know. The land out this way's dry, and the river's dropped low. Haven't seen a storm like the ones over your ridge. Missed the smell of wet earth. Hoping your fence holds. Marin. That was all. No flourishes. No soft words or hopeful lines tucked at the bottom. Just plain, human things. The kind a person wrote when they knew the worth of them. Elias read it twice, then let the paper fall against the table. A small, wry smile pulled at the corner of his mouth, gone almost before it came, but real enough. He folded the letter and tucked it into the top drawer beside a stub of pencil and a stack of unused paper that hadn't seen a mark in years. The lantern stayed unlit that night, but its wick was trimmed again, and a fresh fill of oil waited in the jar beside it. Another night passed, and then one more. The wind came harder from the north, carrying the bite of early frost. The air smelled of distant wood smoke and snow not yet fallen. Elias worked the last stretch of fence at the far edge of the hollow, the cold leaching into the bones of his hands. It was near dusk when he saw the figure. A single rider on the western trail, just a dark smudge against the wide, empty land. The horse moved with the slow, steady pace of a long ride near its end, and the rider sat loose in the saddle, cloak drawn close against the evening chill. Elias felt it before his mind named it, some old, quiet certainty settling in his chest. By the time the horse reached the yard, dusk had thickened into a violet dust blue, and the first threads of rain stitched down from the clouds. The mare's coat shone wet, mane dark and stringy with mist. The rider dismounted, pulling the hood back. Marin stood there in the yard, face streaked with road dust and rain, eyes steady on him. She looked no different, and entirely so. The kind of change a person wears in the set of their shoulders, the turn of their mouth, when they don't know what to say. She stepped to the porch, one hand resting on the rail as the rain gathered in earnest. Elias reached for the lantern. It flared to life under his touch, soft and warm in the deepening dark, the glow painting the worn boards gold and throwing long shadows against the wall. Neither spoke. Marin settled onto the bench beside him, pulling the damp cloak tighter, her eyes on the rain as it thickened, the drops drumming a steady rhythm on the roof. Elias leaned back, one boot propped against the post, the lantern between them. The hollow filled with the sound of rain and the distant, half-hearted cries of coyotes beyond the ridge. The world spun on, slow and unconcerned, while the two of them sat in their easy, unspoken company. They didn't need to fill the air with words. The fence still needed mending. The coyotes would keep calling, and the lantern, steady and unassuming, would burn as long as it was wanted. The days shortened, as they always did come the cold months, and the wind carried with it the brittle smell of frost and wood smoke. The grasses dulled to brittle gray, and the trees clung stubbornly to what few leaves remained, rattling like dry paper in the wind. The work slowed, though there was always enough to fill the daylight. Marin stayed. She told him one evening, not long after her return, as they shared the last of a cornbread loaf and a pot of coffee that had turned bitter from too long on the stove. She spoke it like a plain thing, the way one might remark on the weather or a fence post that needed tending. "I'll stay through the winter," she said. Elias, seated opposite her, didn't look up from where he was sorting a handful of bent nails on the table. He didn't ask for longer, didn't ask for anything, just gave a small, near imperceptible nod, the way men do when something matters more than they can say aloud. The wagon wheel cracked again a week later, a clean split near the hub. They worked it together in the barn, the cold seeping into their hands, the smell of rain-soaked hay thick around them. Elias held the wheel steady while Maren fit the new spoke, their movements practiced now, wordless in the way of people who've learned the weight and measure of each other's silences. They shared meals when the day's work allowed, beans thick with molasses, rough cornbread baked in the skillet. Elias would set the plates down without comment, and Maren would pour the coffee. Neither felt the need to fill the air with idle talk. The hours spoke enough. In the evenings, the lantern's glow pooled soft over the porch boards. The coyotes still called, though their cries seemed somehow less lonely now. The wind came down from the hills, stirring the dry grass, and carrying with it the scent of earth, and the sharp bite of winter coming on. Little things gathered between them. Maren took to humming old songs Elias half remembered from years past, the kind his wife used to hum while kneading bread or shelling peas in the shade. No grand ballads, just soft, tuneless melodies meant to keep company with the passing hours. Elias, for his part, began leaving a cup of coffee on the table each morning before dawn, long before Maren rose. It was never spoken of, but she always found it waiting, steam curling slow into the chill morning air. She mended his coat one afternoon without being asked, sitting in the patch of sun that slipped through the window. The sleeve had split along the seam, and her needlework wasn't the finest, but it held. Elias found it draped over the back of his chair at sundown, the tear gone. Neither remarked on these small kindnesses. They were not the kind of people to name such things. But in the quiet, in the slow gathering of gestures and glances, something old and steady took root. The days turned colder. The first snow came as a thin dusting, enough to silver the fence posts and hush the land in pale light. The world softened around the edges, the sky low and heavy, the nights long. And still they sat together on the porch most evenings, watching the horizon bleed from gray to dusk to starshot black. The lantern sat between them, its light steady, casting a gentle glow over the porch and the worn boards beneath their boots. The coyotes called from somewhere beyond the ridge, their voices threading through the cold like a song too old for words. The narrator's voice comes in then, soft as dusk itself. Some loves aren't written in fire or shouted in the streets. They don't come in a rush or burn with the heat of a fast, furious thing. Some settle into the bones quiet as snowfall, steady as the scent of earth before rain. The kind you carry like an old coat, worn but reliable, built for long seasons and long roads. They didn't speak of love, not in words meant to be remembered. No promises crossed between them. No fine declarations hung in the air. And yet, the world felt less empty for it. The final image holds there, Elias and Maren, side by side on the porch, the land stretching out before them as the horizon softened to dusk. The lantern burned steady between them. The night gathered close, and the wind carried the coyotes' song into the dark.